All right, so I want to do a review of arrays and talk a little bit more about how objects work. So today I want to spend some time going over SFML. In order to actually properly use SFML, you actually have to have some knowledge of how arrays work. Albert, if you want to, maybe, yeah, actually.
That one doesn't work. I can give up minus one.
Yeah, if you don't mind, Cody. So we're going to talk more about objects and how to use them in games, because most of the time when you're working in a game, you're dealing with objects. So you're going to be spending most of your time dealing with that as opposed to simple variables. Okay, so I want to talk more about arrays and how they're defined. So this is going to be a review of kind of the homework and how to actually create them. So arrays are actually very similar to regular variables. The concept of an array is just, hey, instead of it storing one value, it stores multiple values. So the declaration for an array is actually very similar to a regular variable. You have the type of variable, you have the name, and the only difference really is you have to specify the number of elements you want to store in it. Think about like inventory slots. You have to know how many inventory slots you want to have ahead of time with regards to this array. So in this case here, there's a variable type here. It's called a short. It's half the size of an integer. And the variable name is months here. And we're creating 12 elements inside of it. So this array basically represents a number for every month. Now, because you have this all declared as with a variable name, anytime you use that variable, now you actually have to declare the index of that variable too, of where you want to access it. So here's another example of an array, right? Like the variable type here is an integer. The name is Ragnar, and it has 7 elements in it. It holds 7 different values. Now, you access the values inside that array by specifying an index into that array. So in this case here, this represents essentially the memory as far as how it's laid out. It's saving some room for all 7 elements. Notice though that the indexes start at 0 as opposed to starting at 1. And you can tell it goes from 0 all the way up to 6, so there's actually 7 elements inside of here. The first element in the array will start at index 0. And then progress forward from there. Every type of variable that's stored in one of those slots is an integer. You know that because that's the variable type that's declared before the variable name. So in general, how you declare an array is just what variable type do you want? What do you want the name of the array to be, and how big do you want that array to be? Now this type can be any variable type. It doesn't have to be an integer. It can be a string or a bool or a character. In fact, in C, most of the time when you're using a string, so that is like the word, like we have a variable type called a string which stores words. In C, all a string is just an array of characters. That's all it is. It looks like this. You declare a string in C by doing this. You have a character, you put char here, you put the name of the string, you specify how big you want that word to be. If you guys take any programming interview questions or tests, oftentimes they will ask you to manipulate strings by using character arrays like this. Because it has an interesting challenge because arrays have a problem because you have to know the size of it up front. So let's say you say, hey, I want a word that has 10 characters in it. So you make your array and you put 10 as the array size. The interview question might be, hey, I want to stick another word onto the end of that first word. The problem is that other word is bigger than the first word. So how do you actually combine those two together? Most of the programming interview questions are how do you actually change the size of this array dynamically. This is something that we're not going to really spend time on here because it deals with memory allocation, but I do want you to know that there's a way to take this memory and say, hey, I actually just want you to give me more room for this array. I want you to give me back some room, and then you copy it all over. It's kind of like upgrading to like a bigger car or like a bigger house. You have to take all your shit from the old house, you have to move it into the new house, but it takes a lot of time. That's effectively what you have to do if you want to fit something that's bigger than the array. You actually, what you do is you ask for more memory, bigger than what you have, and you copy it all over into the new space so you have more room. So that is something that is a classic C technique. The reason why C++ is a little bit easier to use is because it takes care of all that stuff for you. For instance, if you have a string in C++ and you just want to stick it onto the end of another one, it's as easy as just calling plus on the two strings. It'll take care of all that memory management for you. However, oftentimes game companies will want to know if you actually understand how to allocate it, how to actually write it yourself if you want to work there. So if you guys are ever curious about how to do that kind of stuff, I'm happy to go over it after class, but I don't really want to spend a bunch of time on it here, mostly because a lot of times in game development, you don't tend to do that stuff with strings. I want to focus on things like actually making games as much as possible, but for those of you guys that are curious, I'm happy to go over it. Okay, so that's the general form for an array. So I actually want to do a little practice here. So let me find this here. I'm going to give you guys a little practice exercise. Let me stop recording.